I think it's time for our watch-along.
All right, this is our weekly palate cleanser, where we actually watch a good match to make up for all the bad matches we watch on Wednesdays on The Experience. But then we got a problem with this one. This is a great match, but then as I was sitting down thinking before we went on the air, trying to figure out how to set the stage for this and give people the context, we would be here for the next 3 hours because this still ties into Shawn Michaels' goddamn snits that he pulled on a regular basis. And even though this is Bret Hart versus Steve Austin, it started in February of that year with Shawn Michaels losing his fucking smile. Because originally, the main event for this WrestleMania was supposed to be the rematch from the previous year, where Michaels had beaten Bret Hart in the Iron Man match, won the title. Bret took a year off because he did the movie thing and he was doing some acting. And also, as he said, he put Michaels over and went away to let Michaels twist and win and fucking hang himself because he couldn't take the pressure or perform as champion because he was a mental case. And that's pretty much what fucking happened. So when Bret comes back, the thought is that the WrestleMania rematch 97, Bret will get his win back. This was one of, go ahead.
So when they did Bret and Austin at Survivor Series, that originally was going to be just a one-off, not building to the submission match?
Well, it might have built to a submission match, but not in this specific spot. And they would have had other matches, obviously, but not here because the whole thing got fucked up. February 13th, 1997, we're in Lowell, Massachusetts at the Memorial Auditorium. It was a special Thursday night Raw. I think that was the Westminster Dog Show again, right? That used to preempt Raw on Monday nights, so we would do a special on Thursdays. And it got him just a day or two before that Vince gets another phone call from Shawn Michaels, and because I remember Vince telling me and Bruce, and this was before Shitstain came along as part of the creative team. There were still problems. Vince says, well, Shawn's gone to the doctor, knee injury, maybe career ending. And I fucking blew snot. I'm like, you got to, because I, at that point, did not believe anything Shawn Michaels said. And yes, he probably did have a knee injury, and I'm pretty sure he did. And no, it wasn't career ending, obviously. The thing is, and as Lloyd's of London found out when they started insuring the wrestlers, any main event wrestler that was a veteran that had been around for a while could have a doctor examine them and find something wrong with them to where when they showed the doctor a tape of what they did for a living and said, should I ever do this again? The doctor would say, not no, but fuck no, you should never do this again. It wasn't that uncommon. The question is whether you really wanted to do it again or not, or whether you wanted to do it at that particular time or not. And so less than 6 weeks from WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels calls fucking Vince, says, what's the doctor? Gonna need knee surgery. Could be career ending. And this is another reason why I've always said the Attitude Era. There were two eras. Part of it was good and part of it was bad. The Attitude Era that most people remember fondly is when these top guys like Steve Austin and Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Undertaker and everybody started really kind of talking to each other on television the way that you could kind of tell they really felt about each other and telling the truth. And that was not a byproduct of Vince Russo's brilliance. That was a byproduct of, in a lot of cases, Vince having a lot of fucking problem children that all of them had an attitude. Some of them were good. Most of them were somewhat bad. Most of them were selfish. If you said to Undertaker, what do you want to do, Taker? Well, he'd come up with something that could help himself and the company and someone else. If you did the same thing to a Shawn Michaels or a Kevin Nash or whatever, it would be all about them and what they didn't want to do and what they would do that would be good for them. But Vince talked to all these guys, And when he had time to plan things out a year in advance and overthink and overanalyze, you got the homogenized, pasteurized, sterile shit that Vince liked because it was all planned out and, done like it was supposed to be. When he didn't have time to overthink shit and something was sprung on him and he had to fucking do something, he talked to several people, everybody involved that he could think of, and then he would talk to Shawn and Bret on the phone or Undertaker on the phone or whoever on the phone. Then he'd talk to me and Bruce. Well, what do you think? Shall we do this or that or the other thing? And he would have all these things in his head that he had heard. And then you would give your thoughts and then you would see his wheels spinning and he'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then you filled in the blanks. So his creative team was never booking anything by itself. They were going by the information that Vince had assembled and the decision that he had made on the direction of the match or the angle or whatever the fuck, the rivalry, whatever, who was going to be champion, etc. Then you fill in the details. With the top guys, that's how he was, because that was the money. With the underneath shit, as long as it was not somebody that he just didn't give a shit about and didn't want on his TV, or you didn't violate one of his particular picadillos, he didn't edit anything for the underneath guys, because in the old days, it never mattered. That's why Shitstain was able to write all this shit for the underneath guys who were just happy and lucky to be there and happy to do whatever, not happy to do whatever, but willing to do whatever, say whatever. So underneath the Attitude Era that everybody remembers with the classic main event matches and big fucking angles and all that shit was all the dreck that the underneath guys were told to do. And that was the other half of the Attitude Era. That was unfiltered Vince Russo. The main event matches, the main event angles, the main event interviews, everything went through not only the fucking guys saying to Vince what they would and wouldn't do and what they did and didn't want to say, but then you had Pat Patterson helping with the matches and the finishes. And then you had JR getting the stories across. And then you had Vince himself sitting in on some of these big ones and making sure that everything was not only the way the boys were going to do it, but close to what he wanted as possible. That was where Russo's germs of ideas about Crash TV filtered into Vince's thinking, but he was always in charge of the top stuff. So there were two Attitude Eras. What drew the money was Vince being forced to let a lot of these guys be themselves just because he had no choice. And underneath was Goofus writing a bunch of stupid shit for the guys that couldn't say no. And the whole Attitude Era would be remembered just as fondly if all that underneath shit had never taken place. Anyway, so what we had was a situation where the champion now, the guy who had beat Bret for the title, and held it for a year and caused everybody all these problems with his fucking attitude, now had decided his career was over, and he does the promo, and he did the promo he was supposed to do. I've been to the doctor. I've got a knee injury. A doctor told me I may never wrestle again. He was scheduled to fight Sid on that Raw special for the title that night, and basically, Michaels then goes into fucking business for himself, talking about how he gave everything of himself during his title reign, the heavy traveling, the public appearances, and he had lost his smile. He just didn't enjoy it anymore. So he gave a celebratory circle around the ring, slapping hands with the fans to make himself a little sympathetic figure, and fucking took his ball and went home. So now Gorilla Monsoon announces, and we had about a day or two to come up with this, that the winner of the Final Four match, which was a four-way match at the pay-per-view the following weekend in Chattanooga on February 16th, it was already booked. It just now, the world title is vacant, and the winner of that match is going to be fucking champion. So Bret Hart beats Vader, The Undertaker, and Steve Austin. What a fucking lineup. And that was, as I recall, a great match, but it also wasn't anything related to what was supposed to be happening, especially building to WrestleMania. And Bret was supposed to win that match so that he would then go and challenge the champion at WrestleMania. Now he's the champion. But now Vince has also decided that he doesn't have an attractive WrestleMania match besides versus Shawn Michaels featuring Bret Hart. And he decides because Steve Austin in his mind wasn't ready yet. And he decides in his mind that the money match would be Sid Vicious versus The Undertaker, because he always goes back to the big guys, and Taker's reliable, and he knew he could do business. However, neither fucking Undertaker nor Sid Vicious was figured into this title picture, and so now Bret is the champion. So now they go to Raw the following night in Nashville, and Bret Hart loses the title to Sid, getting the title match he was supposed to have the previous fucking week, when Steve Austin interferes, because Steve Austin has been a heel to this point. So Steve Austin fucking interferes and goddamn causes Bret Hart to lose the title to Psycho Sid. And then The Undertaker challenges Sid for the title at WrestleMania. This is all on the fly. And by the way, I'm looking at several record books here because my booking book, I'm the one booking these fucking matches, one of the ones. And I didn't even change my fucking booking book. There was so much shit fucked up. I just said, fuck it. Nobody else gives a shit. Why should I? So I'm having to look at record books here too to see what actually did happen, even though it wasn't supposed to. And nevertheless, so anyway, then everybody goes to fucking, Germany and etc. and does a tour over there. And there's some domestic shows as well. But we finally get to WrestleMania 13 in Chicago at the Rosemont Horizon, March 23rd, 1997. And the main event is Undertaker versus Sid for the WWF title, which the Undertaker wins. And you got to remember at this point, people are thinking, wow, with these names, Undertaker, Bret Hart, Psycho Sid, blah, 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 and all these title changes. Yes, this did set up the aura that Raw was unpredictable. And it's a conventional wisdom, don't change the title all the fucking time like this, because then it makes it meaningless, and it makes being a champion meaningless. And everybody pointed to Tommy Rich being the NWA champion for 4 days. This specific month here of all these title changes, I didn't have a problem with, past the point that it wasn't planned and somebody was, for their own selfish purposes, was fucking up all of our business. But it actually, with that kind of talent and that kind of rivalry, and because it was something that never happened before, the WWF champion or the NWA champion was always champion for long periods of time in those days, because it created the aura that you were a legitimate champion. Everybody's talking about Adam Cole now, 404 days. You didn't get the NWA title in those days unless you were set for 2 to 4 years, as a matter of course. Bruno's shortest reign with the WWF title was 3.5 years. Backlund had it for 6. It didn't happen. So when it happened here with these guys, that did juice up ratings and interest. It wasn't, it's one of those things where if you do it, it registers because it's never been done before, and then don't do it again for years. Problem is, because this shit started working, everybody started doing more of it immediately. And now, if a guy has a title for a year, you think it's insane. Because they used to switch it, and that fucking shit stain got to the point where he saw this worked, didn't know why because he didn't understand it, and decided just switch the titles every week on TV because it doesn't make any difference. And that is when something is overused to the point where it means nothing. So, anyway, Vince McMahon was forced into a position where guys had to start shooting with each other and talking more realistically about each other, because he was getting more input from these guys because shit was constantly changing. And at the time, Bret Hart had been a babyface, but he was starting to be more heelish because of his real life issue with Shawn Michaels, and also because the best promo work he ever did was Canada versus the USA, and he believed, and he was right, in that Canada did have better health care than the U.S. and did have more respectable people that had more respect for what he did, instead of the assholes that like to stick their finger up their nose like DX. All that shit was real. I find it again funny that the company that was pioneering and letting people know everything was bullshit kicked off the biggest success of their period in business with shit that the people knew was actually real. But I digress. So anyway, the card there for WrestleMania, The Undertaker and Sid was the main event for the title. Then they actually, in one of the only cases where they used the Road Warriors right, Ahmed Johnson and the Legion of Doom took on Farouk, Savio, and Crush in a Chicago street fight. And I remember the Road Warriors were pretty goddamn popular that night in their gimmick hometown. But underneath that, as well as, let's go with the whole card. The Headbangers in the opening match defeated Henry and Phineas Godwin, Doug Furnace and Phil LaFawn, and Blackjack Wyndham and Blackjack Bradshaw in a four-way match to earn a tag team title shot. So already, even 20-something years ago, they were making the tag team's job, guys. Rocky Maivia, the Intercontinental Champion, beat the Sultan, who was Fatu, who would later be Rikishi, when he was managed by the Iron Sheik and Mr. Bob Backlund. Triple H beat Goldust, Chyna, and Marlena in the respective corners. Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith did a double countout with Mankind and Vader for the WWF Tag Team title. Owen and Davey, I think, were the last team of consisting of top guys that held the tag team titles. And then it was just Job Guy Central from that point out. And then the match we're going to watch today, Bret Hart against Steve Austin in a submission match with guest referee Ken Shamrock. And Shamrock was in this because obviously he was just starting with the company and we wanted to play up his UFC and mixed martial arts ultimate fighting background. And he was the submission expert. This is this guy's fucking line of work. And plus he and Bret were close. So it was a great way to introduce him, I thought. But it added further credibility to the match that these guys were going to have. And the reason why I've always liked this match, and it's been probably my favorite WWF match overall, is because it felt like, even back in the 90s, the WWF matches to me, having been an NWA fan, were always the building's so clean, the lights were so bright, the mat was so clean and sparkling, everything was so sterile. You couldn't get a feeling of legitimate violence and hatred and blood and snot and anger like you could in the NWA matches. That's why I didn't like them as much. These guys had a match in this one that would have, to me, been in place, and I told them both this, at Starrcade or a big Florida show for Eddie Graham or a big Superdome show for Bill Watts or whatever. It was that good a fucking match. It was a better pro wrestling match than anything. And there was a lot of great pro wrestlers in the WWF at this time, but this was a pro wrestling style match, a territory style match. And it just hooked me. So business wise, we've talked about the card. I will go to my book now because business wise, just so everybody knows, even though business was not yet hopping, the Rosemont Horizon sold out, $837,000 house even. The seating capacity was 18,211. I'm sure there were comps in there. I'm not sure what was paid, but it was sold out. Ed Cohen ran the live event department at that time, and he had Bob Collins was his WrestleMania promoter, and Mike Ivanko was one of the local promoters. He had a great local promotion department. So if they needed to fill a building, even in the depths of horrible business, if they needed to fill a building for a major pay-per-view, they'd fucking fill it. I mentioned the house was $837,000. The rent on the Rosemont Horizon was $75,000 flat, including the costs of the TV rights fees originating live TV from there. Now that was building rent. That didn't include ticketing and staffing and expenses. There was a $185,000 advertising budget. That just wasn't for the market of Chicago. That was for the country marketing WrestleMania. And the tickets were $300 for the front row. You got to take the chair home, $100, $45, $35, and $20 for the big card. And Flash Funk took on Billy Gunn in the free-for-all match on the pay-per-view pregame show. What else should we talk about to let people know what was going on at this? Oh, and the pay-per-view business. This was the lowest pay-per-view buy rate that Wrestlemania had done since it had been a thing, attributed to the fact that as much as fucking Vince thought Sid looked great, Sid never drew any fucking money. Shawn just wanted to work with him because he wouldn't hurt him like Vader, because Sid would be careful with Shawn, and Vince liked him because his fucking body was enormous. But with that switch from Michaels to Bret 6 weeks out, and the derailing of all the plans may have laid seeds that led to other guys getting over in the future, but it cost that particular WrestleMania event millions of dollars because Shawn Michaels lost his smile. Vince wasn't smiling that much either when he got the fucking pay-per-view buy rate back. So while the live event did well, the pay-per-view, it was the worst. Is it still the worst WrestleMania of all time? Or did they do another one that sucked worse in the early 2000s? I can't remember.
I'm not sure if anything did worse that I could remember.
Okay, so yeah, so that shows you what. And by the way, just so we go further down the road here, let's go to SummerSlam, which was in August that year. Oh goddamn no, I got the wrong book. It doesn't go to August. Sorry about that, Chief. The previous. We did SummerSlam 96, but the buy rate, I think, for SummerSlam 96 was even better. When Shawn convinced Vince that Vader wasn't going to draw and the buy rate wasn't any good, give me Sid. Then he pulls out on the goddamn thing right before WrestleMania, and the buy rate of WrestleMania was worse than SummerSlam the year before. Anyway, what else do the people need to know?
I guess the only other big point I would make is that Steve Austin won King of the Ring in 96.
Yeah.
And then Bret Hart was gone, and he comes back for Survivor Series. And that's really the big match of Steve Austin after King of the Ring. Steve Austin versus Bret Hart at Survivor Series. Fantastic match. Really a great match. It would be hard to top that match. And somehow they completely topped it here at WrestleMania.
And I'm looking up the, where the fuck did it go? Survivor Series. The Steve Austin, God, this print is so small.
At Madison Square Garden, also the debut of Rocky Maivia that night.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I was doing commentary on that, was I not? On Rocky's debut? I believe I was. Anyway, the Austin match, the result, I'm trying to find it. The goddamn Bret Hart pinned Steve Austin at 28-34. Austin had caught him in the Cobra Clutch because he was still using that since DiBiase had used it as the $1 Million Dream, and DiBiase had been Austin's manager, and Bret did the thing where he kicked off the top turnbuckle and went backwards over the top of him. But it was a tremendous fucking match, and it elevated Austin further at that point. Anyway, so otherwise than that,
and I guess
are we ready to do this?
The only other note is that Steve Austin was clearly the heel leading into that match. However, you started to see and hear more fans cheering for Steve Austin between Survivor Series and WrestleMania. So
yes.
Coming into this match, Bret Hart, who had been the classic babyface for years, wasn't as popular as he had been because Austin was now getting that, what would you call it? He was getting that anti-authority babyface pop everywhere he went.
And it also with Bret, he was getting more and more pointed, and the thing with Michaels was real, and Michaels was a babyface, so some people were starting to take sides to begin with. Austin's getting popular, whereas Bret is starting to get more of an edge to him, but they couldn't just come out and Bret couldn't start kicking fucking babies and Austin couldn't start kissing old ladies. So in this match, and here's the thing about a finish. You can give somebody a finish. If they don't know what they're doing, it doesn't matter. The finish was what was given to these guys so that Austin would come out as a gutsy and more sympathetic figure because he wouldn't quit and he wouldn't give up, but he passed out. So still Austin has not beaten Bret. But once Pat Patterson got with him and they started polishing things and they knew where they needed to go, if Bret Hart didn't know how to work and all he knew how to do was be babyface Bret Hart, this match wouldn't have worked. If Steve Austin didn't know how to work and all he knew how to do was be heel Steve Austin, it wouldn't have worked either. But because they had a match that slowly and without anybody even realizing it in the building until they were into it, led you as an observer to start rooting for the bad guy, Steve Austin, and hoping that he beat the good guy, Bret Hart. And by the end of it, both of them were in exactly the perfect position they needed to be going forward because of not one major thing they did, but because of the match they had and all the things they did that put that thought in people's mind to build up to the finish that cemented it. Did I say that in a way that makes sense?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So it's a double turn, but it wasn't like the fucking double turn of the Midnight Express and the Road Warriors in New Orleans, where the Road Warriors just came out and were pricks from the start and we had already been kind of babyface and, the whole 9 yards. This was starting from scratch, and the fans had no idea that this is the way this was the twist this was going to take.